The following program contains the opinions of the host, guests, and call-in participants. These do not necessarily represent the views of this show's distributors or sponsors. This program may contain obscene, profane, or otherwise objectionable language. Viewer discretion is advised. Yes, it feels so good, doesn't it? Good evening, everybody. Coming to you cordless from Minneapolis, Minnesota. It's Monday night, June 23rd. I had to look. June 23rd, 2025, and this is show number 242. I am Jim Peters. Welcome to another edition of Jim Peters at Night. So, here in Minneapolis, we have this reputation, and I bitch about this constantly if you watch this show in the past. It's cold here in the winter, like shitty, awful cold. And this weekend, it was in the upper 90s, which is fairly unusual. And we had a heat index, which is the opposite of the wind chill, which is normally what you get when you talk about the weather here in Minnesota. We had a heat index of 108, and yesterday, that would be Sunday, even though the temperature wasn't quite as high as it was Saturday, you could have boiled eggs on the sidewalk. It was unbelievable, unbelievable. And I was thinking about this. So I've said this in the past. We have about 2 or 3 days here every winter where the temperature gets below 20 below, almost always in January. And so if you do some little math there, it's about 120-degree difference. Now, I've talked about this in the past. The weird thing about Minneapolis is that we're known for this cold weather, but it gets really hot here in the summer. And as a matter of fact, we have this very, very odd thing, and this is specific to this city, I think, alone in the North American continent, and that is here because it's a strictly continental climate. We're surrounded by water. I mean, the word Minneapolis means the city of water, but and so we have lakes. There's lakes right in the middle of the city here. I mean, a lot of them, and then we have 15,000 lakes in Minnesota, but we don't have a big ocean. So because of that, we have this very strange phenomena where during the summer, if it's warm and it's humid, you can go out at 3 o'clock in the morning and it's still 85 degrees. And last night was one of those nights. It was, it's like the sun is, it's like it's day, except the sun isn't out. That's the best way to put it. When I was a younger man, I used to go out and drive around in the middle of the night during those nights because it was actually pretty cool. But now I'm just pissed off. All right, so what do we got going on here? I'll tell you what's going on. We're not taking calls tonight, but we got the ticker running at the bottom of the screen. If you can call and leave a voicemail if you want, and you can text us a text message at 408-458-5088 if you have a question for our guests. But I'm not picking up the phone this evening, mostly because I haven't gotten much sleep the last couple days, and I'm kind of goofy. So we will have part two as we usually do. I got some news. But we're going to be talking to our guest. Our guest tonight is MICHAEL McNAMARA. He's written a book called From Trauma to Joy. Let me actually give you the whole title here. It's called From Trauma to Joy, Life-Changing Lessons That Fellow U.S. Marines Taught Me After Traumatic Events Occurred in My Life, Lessons That Apply to Anyone. The book came out in March, and it's about dealing with trauma. And I guess we're going to find out, but I guess he's had some experience doing that. So yeah, he's our guest this evening. Tomorrow night, we got Salvador Litvak. He's a Jewish comedian, and we're going to talk to him. Well, I'm basically a student of comedy, which is like a terrible thing because you can't once you start analyzing comedy, it's not funny anymore, and that's really true. It's like an elusive target. But I do want to talk to him about not just the history of Jewish humor and Jewish comedy, but how it manifests in a people that have basically been so terribly uh, misrepresented and misunderstood over the ages, especially now in this current environment with this war we have going on. Speaking of that war, we have a second guest tomorrow night, Jonathan Lockwood, our old friend, the U.S. Army Colonel, retired military historians, coming on to talk about what's going on in Iraq and Iran. A very, very interesting um, developments today. I don't know if you saw this about a couple hours ago. Apparently, Trump has announced that there will that Israel and Iran have agreed to a ceasefire, and we'll talk about that later on tonight and tomorrow too. So that's our tomorrow night. Wednesday, our old friend Larry Newman's here, bail bondsman extraordinaire and Bigfoot investigator, and he will talk about investigating Bigfoot and chasing after people who skip out of their bail bonds, and also he'll talk about ridiculous liberals, because he does that. That's what he does. Thursday, we got a really interesting guy. I've been promoting this for a couple of weeks. Guy's name is L.A. Marzulli, and I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he's written like 24 books on the paranormal, all sorts of stuff, UFOs, ghosts, apparitions, and he's done at least a half a dozen documentary films too. He's been doing this like all his life. So, and somebody I wanted to have on the show for some time. So we got him on Thursday. He's coming on. Next Monday, finally, the return of the all-star panel. So I killed this a few months ago, and I don't know why. I do know why, and I'm not going to talk about it. But we're bringing it back because it was one of the most widely watched features we have here. And so our panel on Monday, that's going to be a week from tonight, is going to be Tim Conaway, Larry Newman, and Jennifer Oliver O'Connell. Normally, Don Zorro joins us. He can't join us that evening. Jennifer's going to sit in for him, which is good, because we probably need a woman to keep all the other three old men, including myself, in line. So that's next Monday. And Tuesday, Dr. Carol Lieberman. She's a forensic psychiatrist and an expert witness, and I'm really fascinated by forensic psychiatry. So she's written a bunch of books too. She's a host on the Voice of America, and she hosts a podcast called The Terrorist Therapist. Oh, nice ring to it. Monday, so that's 2 weeks from tonight now. Monday, Jeff Dornick, who's the CEO of Pickaxe, which is a brand new kind of Twitter X competitor. He's going to be on. We're going to be talking about AI. So that's what we got going on here. We got it going on, as the boomers say. We're booked at least a month ahead of time. I'm really appreciative to all the guests that come on here. Very cool. So we're going to go now. We're going to talk to Michael McNamara here. Stay tuned, everybody. Joining us from his home in Sacramento, California, Michael F. McNamara, and I'm going to call you Mac, the author of From Trauma to Joy. How you doing tonight?
Well, honestly, it's been a pretty amazing 48 hours, right? Since as a retired Marine, since we dropped those bombs, and the news today that Israel and Iran were negotiated a ceasefire, I think is great news, and we'll keep our fingers crossed. But I think for the region, for everybody in the region, and having spent 2 years of my life there fighting, I think it's great news for the region, and so we'll keep our fingers crossed.
Mac, there was something in your biography that stuck out to me, because you don't see it very often. You did a tour of duty in the Marines for about 11 years. Then you left, and then about 10 years later, you came back for another 11 years. So how did that work out? Why did you decide to return? Why did you decide to leave in the first place?
Well, I had 3 kids, and and I didn't know. I wanted to be their father, right? And Marine Corps is hard. You're gone a lot, and I saw guys who loved the Marine Corps like I did, and they were a little bit distant from their kids, and I wanted to be a dad, and so I decided to get out. And I had a great career at the time, and then I came back in because my friends called me, and they were planning the invasion of Iraq, and they said, "Hey, are you still in the reserves?" And I said, "I don't know. I don't get any mail anymore." And they said, "Well, find out, because we want you to come back in. And I said, for what? And they said, we're going to Iraq. I said, we're not doing that. And they said, yeah, well, we can't talk on this phone line,
Yeah.
but check and see if you're, and I wasn't. And so I came back in because my friends told me, they said, hey, look, we're getting all these reservists, and your name came up the other day. You're smarter and funnier than all of them, so we'd rather have you. And I said, I'm not sure that's a compliment, but, and then ultimately, I didn't get back in till after the march up was done, and I sent an email. They're all in Iraq at the time, and I said, hey, for what it's worth, I'm back in. And they said, don't do anything. We just got told we're coming back in February, and you'll go with us in February. And so that was my first trip. And that's when really, in the spring of 2004, that's when Iraq exploded, right? The Battle of Fallujah starts in 2004 and concludes in November. And so I was there for all of that. And so it was a fascinating experience. And then I went back in 2006.
Oh, Mac, I lost you there for a second.
And then I went to Afghanistan in 2010, 11. So I've got a little bit of time. Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, we got a little bit of a bad connection. No big deal. But I lost you there where you said you went back in 2011, and then what?
I went back to Afghanistan in 2011, so I have a little bit of time in the region. So,
hey,
so that's why today is.
Go ahead. Oh, go ahead.
That's why today is, you know, a reason for hope for everybody in the region. You know, all the blood that's been shed there. I certainly know that the Arab states are extremely excited that Iran might be forced back into its container, and that this terror that the Houthis spread, that Hamas spreads, that Hezbollah spreads, those things might, you know, be back in their containers as well, and the region might know an era of peace that they haven't seen in a long time. So
yeah, well, so correct me if I'm wrong here, and I have experts that come on this show to talk about this, and I'm not one. It appears that two things came out of this for me anyway. Iran has no real friends in the region. They're either, you know, I don't know, like friends of convenience or whatever you want to call it. And also, they're basically a paper tiger. It was like all talk and no action. You know, I mean, I think it's, from what I gather, it's spectacular how perfectly this U.S. mission went off. And even before that, then, it's spectacular how well all the Israeli stuff went off, too. I mean, you have two missions here that were basically executed perfectly and just decimated these people. But also, it's astonishing how incompetent they were, or unprepared, or I don't know. Is that how you see this, or?
Well, I can tell you that their deal is war by proxy, right? They've been funding all this stuff. For them to stand up and fight against us or the Israelis, they know they'll lose. They absolutely know they'll lose. And so, you know, really what happened with the Ayatollah, the situation he was put in, if he would have retaliated today and killed Americans, we would have then got after his oil infrastructure. And if we do that, his regime is over. There would be regime change because Iran would have nothing. Their economy is already hurting. So he was in a horrible situation. So he did exactly what I think a lot of us thought he would do, which is shoot something into the dirt, say that they responded, and then say, okay, we're ready for peace. Because he didn't have a choice. He did not have a choice.
Right. Well, actually, you said he did, but it would have been the demise of him and the whole thing. That would have been the alternative. Right.
Right. And these kind of operations, we're peerless. Nobody can do what we do. To project power around the world, right? To do it with the accuracy, no loss of civilian life, right? And then have nobody killed. Nobody can do that like we do.
Right.
And so the big challenge for America is that we don't want to get involved in anything protracted. We don't need any boots on the ground. None of that. Right. Let Iran know that we're not having this anymore. We played this game for too long, right? And we don't want to see anything stupid either. There's a great scene in The Godfather when Vito Corleone, when he's going to bring Michael back from Italy, it's the heads of all the goes, if anything happens to my son, if he slips on a banana peel, if he accidentally hangs himself in a jail cell, I'm going to come looking for answers for you. And I hope that's a message that President Trump sent through somebody, right, to the Iranians. We're not playing this game anymore of you blaming other people, this militia, that militia. Anything that happens, right, we're coming to you. And so, not a good situation to be in.
I do a lot of we do a lot of talking on the show about technology, and I was really surprised to see, first of all, that I didn't realize this. We know there's only 19 B-2 bombers, or actually 18 now. One of them crashed, I guess, during a practice run, and they're $2 billion a piece. And this is the first time those bunker busters were ever actually used in real combat. You know, so that's kind of amazing too. And I didn't know that the B-2s can only hold 2 of them at a time. But also the other real amazing thing is now these planes are 20 years old. They are state of the art still. I mean, for worldwide warfare. But I thought that at this point, I thought somebody would be able to figure out how to get around the stealth capabilities. And no. The Iranians are sitting there. They were completely surprised. Their radar didn't work. It's like, I'm always surprised. I just assume that technology kind of catches up quickly, and no, it doesn't.
Well, it's a constant spiral, right? It's a constant spiral of technology and weaponry and things like that. So it's constantly advancing, you know, and the work the Israelis did was moderately helpful.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, and that started last fall. I mean, the Israelis have been preparing for this since the Mossad first informed their government that the Iranians are enriching uranium. Yeah. They knew this day would come. And it's important that people note the Israelis were not asking for our permission to do this. This is an existential threat to them.
Right.
And they knew at some point they would have to do this.
Yeah.
And so the question was going to be, could they get deep enough to destroy this stuff? And when they couldn't, then the question comes to the United States. What do you do? This stuff has been going on, you know, for 46 years, right? Right. And you have an opportunity to change the calculus in the region. And if you've noticed, the Arab states, right, and they're all Sunni states: Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, the Emiratis, Kuwait. They haven't said a peep, right? Iran is Shiite, and there is no love lost. There is not they're Persian. They're not Arab, and right. So you have to understand that to understand the region. And so you've seen the Arab states sit there and watch. And I'm sure I mean, the Saudi Arabians fought the Houthis, and the Houthis were sponsored by the Iranians. And so I think everybody in the region is very hopeful that maybe we could turn the page on the bloody age of Iranian-sponsored militias and terrorism around the region, and that they could live in peace and they could hopefully prosper in a way they haven't in a long time.
Yeah, I want to get back to your 2 tours in the Marines, especially the last one in Iraq. So you've written a book on trauma. So did you go through some trauma yourself? And can you talk about it? If you did?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll tell you about me. Mine starts when I'm probably 19, 20. My parents separate, divorce, they never speak again. And so the beautiful little and my dad was involved in Major League Baseball. Wait a minute, before I even talk about that, I lived in Grand Forks, North Dakota for 14 years.
Yeah.
To hear people from the Twin Cities talking about it being cold there, we're up there looking at you. You guys are in the banana belt. Right?
I know.
You're in the banana, and I was listening to you earlier. I'm thinking, you got to be kidding me. You live in the warm part of the cold belt.
I know.
And so I thought I should mention that from all North Dakotans.
You should. I'm constantly going off about the fact that, if you think this is bad, Duluth is awful. and you're absolutely right. Fargo, Grand Forks.
Oh my God. Right.
It's worse. I totally,
I just thought I would mention that. So so my parents divorced, and that was really hard for my family. And then I joined the Marine Corps. We're training in Southern California, and a helicopter crashes maybe 75 yards from me. The pilot was decapitated, and during the training incident, right? And me and my Marines, we tried to save the other 3 Marines, and we tried as hard as we could, and everybody died. Then that was in 1993. In 1996, the worst thing I've ever been a part of happened, and that was my sister's husband murdered their 2 kids when she said she wanted a divorce. My nephews were 4 and 6 years old. He got a gun and he shot them both, and then he beat my sister, and then he killed himself. And it's important, I think, because of my 3 years going to war. Everybody thinks PTSD, oh, that's that combat thing, right? No, it's not. It's an anybody thing, and that's why my book is for anybody. Because then I go to Iraq, and then I go back to Iraq, and then I go to Afghanistan, and I was there in all those times. I was there at the height of the fighting. I'm not even close to my sister relative to her zip code and trauma. I'm not in that zip code. And I tell people, if you were sexually abused as a child, you're closer to my sister's zip code than you are to me.
Yeah.
Right. And so as cops and firemen and combat veterans, I think it's important that we realize that we've seen a lot of bad stuff, but virtually none of us have seen our children murdered or responded to calls that involved our family. And so then I go to war, and even on the bad days there, the thought would go through my head, right? This has been a horrible day, but it's not as bad as what my sister went through. And that would be in my head. And then I came home, and then my wife and I got divorced, something I thought would never happen to me. And then one of my 2 younger sisters freezes to death as a result of alcohol poisoning and cold weather in Indianapolis. And so I couldn't get away from this stuff, Jim. But again, what's important that people know is I'm an infantry officer. We kill people and we try to save people. That's what we do every day. And yet the worst thing I've ever seen happened to my sister, right? And so I think that surprises a lot of people in the book. And that's so as I learned these things, most of as I start a podcast called All Marine Radio, and we're having a suicide problem. Our suicide keeps going up and our combat involvement is going down.
Yeah.
And none of us can figure it out. Like, why is this happening? And then the commandant of the Marine Corps comes on, the head of the Marine Corps comes on, who was a friend of mine, who was my commanding officer just before the helicopter crash. He comes on and we're talking, and he says, well, Mac, you have to understand, when we do the investigation into all of this, 80 to 90% of them, they've never even deployed, let alone gone to combat. And I said, what? Because we all assumed that our suicide was directly linked to our operations. Right. And he's telling me it's not that way.
Right.
And I could not believe that. Well, then I start picking that scab, right? And again, the whole basis of my podcast was we had the suicide problem. I hope that by discussing it, I could help a little bit. But I know Marines won't listen to that stuff. They will. If I say we're talking about mental health, I will have no listeners, okay? But because they're Marines, you could trick them, and that's what I would do, right? So I would tell them something like, hey, Sergeant Major Peters is coming on tonight. He was a squad leader in the Battle of Fallujah. We're going to talk about his experiences. And 2/3 of the way through every interview, I would say, well, what happened when you came home? And they would say, oh, well, you have to understand that really my struggle started when I was a kid, right? My dad was a drug dealer. I dealt drugs when I was 9. And they start telling you the story. I joined the Marine Corps to get to a better place in life and get away from some bad stuff. And then, I got married. My wife and I separate. We're getting divorced. I'm drinking. I don't talk to anybody about my struggle. 3 times I have a gun on a table in front of me. Once it's in my mouth. And Jim, I heard a variation of that story over and over again. And after 2 years, I thought, this has helped me so much. It's changed my life. I need to take the best practices I've learned and I need to share them with people because I've always been a leader, right? I was a leader in the Marine Corps and whatnot. And so I started doing that in 2019. And as I began to do it, my life changed even more because I then experienced the joy of helping somebody who's in the darkness of the valley of the shadow of death, the place where trauma sends you. And they were there not because of combat, they were there because of child abuse and all these other things that happen in life.
I do have to ask you about that. So if it wasn't combat that was driving all these guys to this, what specifically was it from your picking that scab? What did you find out? Was it childhood stuff? Was that what it was?
The broad heading is adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. That's the broad heading. And so think about this, Jim. Who's looking to get out of town at the age of 17, 18, 19, 20?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
A lot of that group, not everybody, a substantial portion of that group, right, is getting away from something bad and trying to get to something better. God bless them, right? Their peers are dead. They're being sex trafficked. They're drug addicts. I mean, and so these young people are trying to get to a better place. And yet, when they struggle, when it doesn't work out, right, when they have further issues, financial, relationship, they're very fragile. And one of the reasons they're fragile is because we do this thing called gentle parenting, starting in the late 80s and 90s. And you get asked about your feelings all the time. How did that make you feel? At school, somebody passes gas wrong. They get everybody together. How did that make you feel? So if you're halfway paying attention, what's your logical conclusion? My feelings are really important. And then you graduate from high school. And what do you find out? Nobody gives a shit about you. And nobody gives half a shit about your feelings. Right. Whoa, where did this happen? And then life gets hard, but you don't know how to deal with it. And that's so we create fragile.
Really good point. That's, I mean, because I would take it even a step further. It's not just even that nobody cares about your feelings. At some point you start to realize maybe even you shouldn't care about your own feelings. You know, I mean, it's like, what does it matter? And I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's the parenting.
Well, I tell a story that I got asked about my feelings when my mother was spanking me. Okay. So I get and you didn't get there easily with my mom. I call her affectionately Corporal Punishment Kathleen, right? Kathleen, you got there through lying or by defying her. I don't know how many times she told me to stay off the construction site near our house. My response, yes, ma'am. Get around the corner, me and my friends, straight to the construction site.
Right.
We're playing, and I'm the little ringleader of my friends. So somebody leaves the keys in a backhoe one day. So it's my responsibility as the leader to start that, right? I mean, come on, I'm the little ringleader, so I do. And it vibrated, it didn't move very much, but somebody saw, tells my mom, right? So I come home, put my gold Stingray with the white banana seat in the garage. I come in the house, she's smoking her Parliament cigarette. She said, go get my stick. And I knew what happened to her. And so I go get it. We go in the bathroom. I go over her knee. And while she's spanking me, she's talking shit to me, right? How does this make you feel, genius? Didn't I tell you not to go to that construction site? Right? Are you out of your mind starting a backhoe? And I remember looking over my shoulder, and her cigarette is in her mouth, wagging like Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones, right?
Yeah.
Right? But I knew that was a trick question because she didn't really want an answer.
Yeah.
But that's when I got asked about my feelings. I knew they weren't important. But think about how different young people grow up today. Gentle parenting, timeout corner. If you don't want to eat your carrots, that's fine. You're not going to get dessert. And the kid says, okay. And when dessert gets served, what does the kid do? Throws a fit. Okay, you can't have 3 scoops. You could only have 2. Okay. So it's on my terms. I live my life on my terms. I don't do things I don't want to. My parents don't make me because they don't want to hurt my feelings, right? And we create fragile young people. And then life comes at them and they struggle. And then let me tell you, it's not the kids' fault. The kids are capable of anything. But you've got to prepare your kids for life. That's your job as a parent.
Mac, do you think that any of that applies to some of the young people are protesting across the country over stuff that, from what I can tell, in many instances, they don't even know what they're protesting for? Do you think
they don't even understand it?
No, they don't.
It's so ridiculous.
I've said this. I've been doing this now for years. I've been saying for like 5 years. The single funniest thing I've heard ever in the last 5 years is gays for Gaza and queers for Palestine. Yeah, that's really good. Yeah. You try being queer over in Palestine. You do that. It's like, what are you thinking? I mean, I don't even understand it. It's like, that's the stupidest thing ever. And so, and how can you, and on top of all this, the test scores for young people in terms of their actual intellectual development is going down the tubes. That's the other thing too. I'm an old curmudgeon bitching about shit, but But I don't understand. The fact is, if you're going to spend all your time in school talking about your feelings, you're also not doing math. There's only so much time in the day, you know? And so then when
Well, and
go ahead.
think about, if your feelings are at the center of your life, good luck with that.
Yeah, right.
If that's right. And what I tell, when I talk, I tell people, look, life's not a Facebook post, man. Life is hard. The whole time you live, you will struggle. That's the truth. Okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll be happy. Sometimes you'll be unhappy, but you will struggle your whole life to provide, right? To educate yourself, to raise children, right? To provide for your retirement, to feed your family. That's the struggle. But you talk to young people and they think life by default is that they're supposed to be happy. It's not that way. And so again, it's not their fault though. It's the fault of parents. And I tell parents, my two oldest sons have kids now. Your job is not to raise the smartest kid or the best athlete. You better raise a kid that can take on life, which means you have to allow them to fail. You have to coach them all the time. Get up, get up, get up, get after it again. Dust yourself off, get after it again. Do not quit. If you do, and if you teach those time-honored lessons to your kids, right? That's farm country in the Midwest, small town America.
Right.
Those are the values. That's why those kids succeed. They're strong kids. That's what you got to teach your kids. Because if you create fragile kids, right, when life rolls on top of them, and that's just, to me, the sad part about a lot of suicide with young people, right? They just say, I can't take this anymore. What happened to you that was so unique? And their answer is, not much, not much.
Mac, do you think I'm being too extreme by even saying the point of life is to struggle?
Well, there's a quote that's attributed to Nietzsche that he didn't really say. And he said, so the quote is, to struggle is human. To live is to find meaning in the struggle. And I say, Nietzsche went mad a few years later. He didn't even say that. A guy named Doug Alport said that. But here's what I'll tell you I know is true. To live is the struggle, right?
Right.
To live with joy is to find meaning in your struggle, right? And so that's the challenge of life. Can you do that, right? And you can find countless examples of that, right? So life is going to be a struggle. That's life by default, right?
Right. And so, and I think this too. If life is going to be a struggle by default, you might as well do something that's hard. If it, there's no difference really. You're going to struggle whether you do something difficult or whether you don't do anything. It's going to be a struggle either way. You might as well choose something. Go ahead.
But if you're not prepared for the struggle, because people have given you things, because you haven't had to earn grades, because you haven't had to work harder to do things. If you don't show up for work on time, let alone 5 minutes early, right? And you didn't get promoted and you can't understand why you didn't get promoted, you're so ill prepared for life. And at some point, you're going to have to learn these things, or you're going to be living in your parents' home for the rest of your life. And so, again, it's a parent's responsibility. Teach your kids about hard work. Teach your kids about showing up on time. Teach your kids about not calling in sick unless they are really sick, okay? And then watch how fast they get promoted. Watch how fast they get promoted, and they'll be so excited. And then just keep doing that. Learn one trick, keep doing that. When you don't have anything to do at your job, your part-time job, clean something, and you'll get promoted. You'll be the shift manager in a week. I guarantee you. I guarantee you. And I know, because my daughter did that. Her first part-time job, I threatened all my kids. You're going to be 5 minutes early. Everything's going to be clean. You're going to walk in with a smile on your face. And when there's nothing to do, you're going to be the hardest worker. And when there's nothing to do, clean something. And they come home and they're like, Dad, you won't believe it. I'm like, what? I got promoted. Like, no kidding. Because everybody else is just standing around yakking, right?
Yeah,
on their phone, right? Work. There's a reason we call it work.
Okay.
But again, those are old-fashioned values. But what I see is they transfer into a young person's ability to deal with difficult things in life.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you. Those are old-fashioned values. But it seems there's been a distinct difference in our culture in the last 20, 30 years. I mean, do you think that's true? And where did that come from?
Well, I think, like, I didn't read a book about parenting. I just did what my mom did. No meant no. When I say no, that means no. You better stop what you're doing, or there's something bad's going to happen.
Uh-huh.
So I think when there's no consequences with, and I didn't beat my kids, you know, and my kids are all productive human beings now. And like me, when they were doing something wrong, they knew they deserved it. But if there's no consequences when you are disrespectful, when there's no consequences when you fail and you're not trying, then all you're doing is encouraging that behavior because it's easy. And so absolutely. And again, it's not the kids. Kids are no different, right? Kids are no different. If you give them structure, right, and you show them what succeeds and you help them conquer their demons, watch what they become. But if you just allow anything, watch what they become then. And it's not going to be something good.
So I'm backtracking here. How did your sister deal with the fact that her husband murdered her kids? How literally? How did she get? That's. I mean, I can't imagine anything more horrible than this. I mean, you're absolutely right. If I was in Iraq fighting, I would come home every day and say the same thing. This was terrible, but it wasn't as bad as what happened to my sister. I would say the same thing. How did she end up getting through it?
She's the toughest human being I know, right? And you know, she and I had a conversation shortly after that day, and I said, you know, if you kill yourself, he wins, and you can't ever let him win. He can't win. If the lives of your little boys are going to mean anything, your life has to mean something. And Peggy, people are going to tell you stupid things. They're going to tell you time heals all wounds. That's a lie. They're going to tell you that there's a purpose in this. That's a lie too. If there's a purpose in it, it's because you gave it a purpose.
Yeah.
Inherently, there is none. They're going to tell you God doesn't give you more than you can handle. My response to that: how the hell do you know? Were you in the planning conference when God divvied that stuff out?
Yeah.
Then why don't you shut your mouth? Because when you say that to somebody who's been through something devastating, it's really hurtful. But I know why they say that, and I hear Christ's words on the cross, and that is, I think, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they say. Right? They don't know what to say to somebody who's been through something like that, and they regurgitate something they heard their parents say at a funeral.
Right.
And I think those words had an impact on my sister. And it's, I mean, it's, I don't know. I mean, I have friends that are no kidding American war heroes, and they've heard an interview I did with my sister. And I remember one of them saying to me, dude, I'd be embarrassed to talk about my shit in front of your sister. Right. It's like, it'd be stupid. Right. And so she's a tough woman. And I think in her head that she can't let her children down by destroying her own life. And so she's done her best to live a good life.
Mr. McNamara, that's honestly one of the wisest things I've ever heard anyone say. I mean, I think you probably saved her life just by what you told her. I mean, I can't. That's quite profound. I hear a lot of stuff.
I didn't make that up. The day of the helicopter crash, about 3 hours after, one of my most senior guys came up to me, and I was watching blood off my forearm and off my hands, and he said, "Hey, sir," he said, "how are you doing?" And I said, "Well, we've been busy. I haven't thought about me, so I don't know." And he looked at me and he said, "You know, you're never going to get over this." And I said, "What?" He said, "You'll never get over this." And I'll clean this up a little bit, but this is verbatim. I said, "Well, Gunny," he's a gunnery sergeant. "Well, Gunny, I'm not exactly effing sure, but I'm pretty effing sure that the effing therapist doesn't say that to the effing patient right about effing now. So why don't you get the F away from me?" And he looked at me and he shook his head. He said, "No, sir." He said, "You need to know that." And I said, "Who told you that?" He said, "Vietnam guys told me that." He said, "And I went through something difficult, but not like this." He said, "It's always helped me." And that was my introduction to the Valley of the Shadow of Death. And here's a complete thought. You won't ever get over it, ever. How could you, right? When you struggle, it means you're a normal human being, right? You can't go through that stuff without it coming back. The video, the audio. And so that's normal. There's nothing wrong with you. And you could still live a great life. And so a little bit of Marine Corps, the blunt truth in the face, right? This little explanation of it, and then this relentless optimism that we can conquer this stuff. And so what I had to learn was, but that's not the way the nation does it. If you go through something traumatic, Jim, you'll be given medications for anxiety, sleep, anger. Marines call that the zombie cocktail, right? And then you can go to therapy forever. And if you look at the trend lines for suicide in the nation just set a record. The DOD is setting records, and we're nowhere near a conflict.
That's right.
So if you look at that approach, I tell people it's a flawed approach, okay? Because you're numbing symptoms. What I would love to teach you, if you buy my book, is this: there's an answer inside of you. The first thing is understand the truth. You're not going to get over it. When you struggle, that's normal. So what do you do when you struggle? Do you drink? Do you keep it to yourself? And you'll be familiar with this story. Why is suicide so high in farm country? Farmers are losing property because of bad crop decisions, bad weather, and things like that. This farm's been in my family for 5 generations, and I'm going to lose it. Do they talk about it? No. What do? They drink. I mean, it is the upper Midwest, right?
Right.
When in doubt, soak it in alcohol. And then ultimately over time, they go to a darker and darker and darker place. And then on some night, they end their own life. And so that is the way most of the nation does it, though. And that's what I learned. I didn't know that. And so a therapist will look at you and say, well, Jim, I really think you should consider how you're using alcohol. What I will say is, Jim, don't be a stupid ass, okay? Stop drinking. You're destroying your life, okay? And don't tell me you can't do it, because millions of people do that on this planet every year. So, yeah. Jim, get off your dead ass and quit drinking. Do you understand me? And watch how fast your life changes. So you're not afraid to talk about it. Not with everybody, somebody who loves you and will not judge you. You quit drinking. When you're feeling shitty, go outside and go for a walk, okay? Learn how to meditate. Learn how to calm your brain down. Learn how to use breathing to interrupt anxiety and anger.
Especially because people in that situation aren't actually addicted to alcohol. They're drinking to drown their sorrows, and there's a difference. I will just bring this up because I find this absolutely fascinating. My cousin's husband passed away a few years ago. He was in his 70s. He had been on the wagon for about 40 years. And he told me just before he passed away, I'm talking to him, he said, I have not had a drink in 40 years. And yet when I wake up every single morning, it's the very first thing I think of. And I'm thinking, Jesus Christ, man, you are addicted. That's addiction. If you can't get it out of your head and you haven't done it in 40 years, you're addicted. But the people you're talking about are not addicted to alcohol. They're drinking to drown their sorrows. So in that sense, quitting should be easier. Shouldn't they?
Well, some of them are addicted.
Yeah.
Right? But sure, so the question is, what do you do? Behaviorally, what do you do? Right? And so you could be addicted to something, but you can conquer that addiction.
Yeah, you can't heat it.
People do that.
Right.
And I think, Jim, it starts with understanding what is true. Right? When I use the phrase the valley of the shadow of death, that's where trauma sends you. Everybody nods their head. You want to know why? Because they've been there. They know that. And when I tell them, right, you're never going to get over it, I see all these smiles. And I'll ask them, like, why are you laughing? Like, when you said it, it just like hit me in the head like a brick. Well, no kidding. But I've thought that I'm supposed to somehow or other leave this behind.
Right.
I'm like, yeah, right. It doesn't work like that. Yeah. Next one, right? Trauma is a normal part of life. Most of us go through it. I have a saying, nobody gets to the car wash without getting wet. And it's true. You may not know it, but the people you know probably have some very, very serious stuff that has gone wrong in their life. They just don't share it with you, right? And then, these are the 4 goals and 10 commandments. So the first goal is, those are the first 4 commandments. The first goal is you got to learn to coexist with it. It's not going away. Some days are going to be tough, right? And you'll learn how to surf in the valley of the shadow of death. Some days are going to be easy. Don't think it's gone away, because it hasn't. It's there. It'll be there. And then the foundation, learn how to handle your money. Take financial stress, which is a killer, right, out of your life. Save money, a savings account, right? And then stop drinking. Next, stay physically fit, right? Embrace wellness practices like meditation, like breathing. So that's infrastructure, right? So that's the second goal, is develop infrastructure. Third goal, live with discipline. Do these things every day. Have a daily basic routine. Get up. I have one. I get up, I weigh myself, I meditate, I calm my brain down, right? I have these little sayings that I look at and I recite. I get in the shower, I start my day, I check all my bank accounts, I take care of my money. That keeps me happy and calm, right? And then I work out at some point during the day, I eat something green, and I try to journal every day. Create a daily basic routine. There's nothing mystical about transforming your life, okay? It is the self-discipline to do things that are in your best interest, that are good for you. But the magic, Jim, is this. At some point, your life's going to change, right? And it's going to change a lot. And I'm not talking about in years. I'm talking about days, weeks, and months. If you'll do these things, if you just want to run your mouth about them, then, get used to it, because it's going to be around. But if you'll do these things, I will guarantee you, because I've seen it so many times, that you're going to transform your life. And then you're going to experience a joy, because your life's going to change. Your relationships with people will change, because you're not being destructive anymore. And at some point, you're going to stick your hand out to somebody that's struggling. And you're going to say, hey, man, can I talk to you? I heard what you just said. There's nothing wrong with you, right? That everything you're doing is an adjustment to that trauma that I just heard you talk about. And there's nothing wrong with you. And they'll look at me and they'll say, are you a therapist? And I'll say, no. Have you ever heard a therapist say the F word this much? And they're like, no. I said, that's because I'm not a therapist. I'm a normal person like you, but I've been down this, and I'm a guide in the valley of the shadow of death. And if you do that and you help people, right, at some point, one of them will call you and say this. Remember that phone conversation we had 2 months ago? The long one? Yeah, I remember that. You don't know this, but I was getting ready to kill myself that night. And the reason I'm alive today is because of you. And that is the journey from trauma to joy, right? And I describe that as the Grinch moment, the moment when the Grinch hears a Who people and his heart grows 3 times.
Yeah.
And you're capable of that. And you know how many people around you that are struggling. And when you look at them and say, there's nothing wrong with you, and you look at them and say, you're not going to get over it. It's okay. It's okay to struggle. Just come talk to me. And then they begin to do that. Your life will take on a beauty, right, that I would struggle to describe. I tell everybody I know, I'm the coolest person I know. And my kids cringe. They're like, Dad, stop saying that. And I say, no. And it's not because I'm inherently cool, which I kind of am, but that's not the reason. The reason is these things happen to me all the time, Jim. Yeah. Because I've been doing this for 7 years. And now the book and the miracles that I've seen in the book, there's 24 individual stories. A woman that was sexually abused starting at the age of 5 looks at me and says, that guy took my life from black and white and turned it into Technicolor, just like the Wizard of Oz. He did that because I had been trying to get over it. I thought I was supposed to be able to leave this stuff behind. And he took that away from me. The night he said, you'll never get over it and there's nothing wrong with you, you got to learn to coexist with it. And so I've seen these miracles. So I don't care what your trauma is. I don't care if you've gone to war, if you're a cop, if you've been raped as a child, right? You've been a victim of domestic violence or watched somebody die of a prolonged illness.
I was going to ask you about that. I was going to ask you about the different types of trauma, because I had something really interesting that happened yesterday. I've been reading your stuff for the last few days, preparing for this interview. Yesterday, I read an article by a guy named Anthony Braglia. Now, I don't know if I talk a lot on the show. I have a lot of UFO people on the show, and you don't have to agree with me or not, but my basic tenet on all this is there's overwhelming evidence that Earth is being visited by people from other planets. At this point, I don't think that's a thing. So he wrote an article about the people from Roswell, New Mexico, some of the actual people there from the crash of 1947, who basically their lives were ruined because they saw the bodies of the extraterrestrials. Now, this is a trauma that's entirely conceptual. No one got hurt, or they did. There's 4 dead bodies there, tiny little extraterrestrial people. But other than that, no one physically got hurt. No, but they literally went crazy because of what they saw. Many of these people killed themselves, and so and that made me think of you, because the question is, or then I have it: does it matter what kind of trauma you're going through? Because that's kind of a conceptual trauma that really, I mean, how do you even explain that? I don't even know. Does it matter?
Well, let me answer your question like this.
Sure.
When I started, I would ask people, do you talk about your shit, right? And the answer I would get from combat veterans was, I can only talk to other combat veterans. And that made sense to me, right?
Right.
And so the more I did it, I then started to follow up that question. When was the last time you did that? Silence. I haven't done that. Oh, that's you telling me that I have no business going there with you, right? That you don't want to talk to me. So it's keeps maintaining this safe, isolated space.
Yeah.
So, and I heard that from all kinds of different
And
people.
that's really amazing, because you're a combat vet. So and they wouldn't talk to you. It's like,
well, I didn't know them well, right? So, but again, that's a lie. They didn't do it. That's the way they push anybody away and say, I'm not talking about it, because they
right.
didn't even do it with their fellow combat veterans. And so then I know a woman from Sacramento, and she had a heart attack, and she was struggling, and she's 52 years old. She's a fit woman. And so she was struggling, and I said, you should watch these videos I've made. So she says, can I show them to somebody else? I said, yes. They call me. You need to do online seminars. I don't know how to do that. And they said, well, if we put it together, will you do it? And I said, yeah. Okay. So now the woman who sexually abused at the age of 5, most of these women that came, and there were combat veterans in there too, and there was a few other, just different people. Everybody's trauma is different. And what they said to me was, well, we're working on our drinking, because a lot of them were recovering alcoholics. We've never really discussed why we drank in the first place.
Uh-huh.
And I watched them. So they start talking about the way they dealt with it. They start talking about their struggles. How much do you think they cared about where their trauma came from?
I don't know. Tell me.
Not one bit. The combat veteran hears the rape victim say something and says, I did the same thing.
Uh-huh.
And then they start helping each other, and they start listening from each other to each other, and they start learning from each other. And so the third commandment of post-traumatic winning is trauma is trauma is trauma. They're just different paths into the valley of the shadow of death.
Right.
So we're all standing down there.
Your answer to my question is, it doesn't matter, right?
It doesn't matter. We think it does. We think we're so unique, nobody could understand me. And then you get among people that have their own version of it, and they'll tell you the way they reacted. I faked like I was okay, and I numbed myself. Sometimes with alcohol, sometimes with work, sometimes with parenting. If you're young, gaming, porn, right? and so we fake like we're okay. We numb ourselves, right? And then we isolate ourselves. That's how we do it. And that takes you deeper into the valley of the shadow of death. But it's the way it's the way everybody does it.
Do you think there's a difference in how men and women process this? I mean, traditionally, women talk more than men, but also women are really good at talking without saying anything too. So,
well, I'll leave the second half of that comment for you to take responsibility for, because I'm not.
That's right.
I'm nobody's dope. My experience is, when you have men and women together, women are more likely to initially talk, because for whatever reason they do.
Yeah, that's right.
But that's an initial condition.
Uh-huh.
As they get comfortable. And what I've seen is men get inspired by the courage of women. And like, I don't know if I want to talk about my combat experiences with these people. I don't even know. And then you hear them talk about being raped. You hear them talk about being abused in domestic violence, being closed funds, having their teeth knocked out, having their cheek caved in. And you're listening. And I know I've had combat friends that told me this. He goes, the courage that those women showed when they talked about their stuff, my thought was, and this is key in the book, if they can do it, I can do it. And that's the truth. And so initially, women, I think, are more inclined to speak, even in mixed gender groups, right? but what I found is that the inspiration happens very quickly, right?
Yeah.
That's courage. And people will say, "Oh, thank you for being so vulnerable," and I don't like that, right? When something's vulnerable, what does it do, right? Hunters in Minnesota, North Dakota, Wisconsin, right? It hides, right?
That's
It
right.
hides.
Right.
So when somebody stands up in front of other people and says that, you know what that's an act of? Courage. It's straight up courage. And we need to describe it as that, right? Because that's what we want. We want you to be courageous. The path out of the valley of the shadow of death requires courage. And you're going to feel like you're nervous about talking about it, even with somebody close to you. Don't be afraid. Because what we're afraid of is they're going to judge us, right?
Yeah.
And here's what I tell people: you don't have to tell them the whole truth. Tell them 20% of the truth. Stick your toe in the water. I said, and what happens if all they do is love you more? And they start crying. They immediately start crying. And I had a good friend. He was raped 3 times, twice in the Marine Corps, once in college. And he was a drinker and he was a bad father. He finally got his family together and he looked at them and he said, I have a story I have to tell you. And then he called me and he goes, hey, you don't know this, but you've changed my life. We were roommates together at one time. I said, what did I do? He said, well, I listened to you. And he tells me the story. And I went, holy shit. And he said, a week ago, I told my family. And I said, so let me guess what happened, monkey head. He said, I said, all I did was love you more. And he said, it was one of the most beautiful days of my life. And I've been terrified to do it. And so I tell people, only tell 20% of the story. Stick your toe in and watch what happens. And then when you get a response you don't anticipate, which is more love, you're going to want to share more of the story. And there's no requirement for you to tell 100% of it. But there's a requirement because that's called intimacy. And after we go through trauma, we need intimacy. We crave it. But a lot of us aren't sure what'll happen if we go there. And I'd say give them a chance. So men, women, initially women will lead and then men will be inspired and then they inspire each other. And it's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. Because the only unique part of trauma is the way it comes into our lives. We're all little traumatic snowflakes, right? How we react to it, we fake like we're okay, we isolate ourselves, and then when we go looking for help, we tend to do the same things. We get prescribed meds, we go to therapy, we say, you know what, don't like it, didn't work. And a lot of times it's because we're not ready to be helped. And so now we're just in this isolated space, faking it because nobody's coming to my pity party. And that was me. And so what I've learned and what the book is about, the book is a blueprint. You have an answer inside of you. Understand the truth. You're not going to get over it. It's okay. You're going to struggle. It's okay. What do you do when you struggle? Instead of being alone, instead of drinking and faking, sit down and talk to somebody. Don't drink. Go for a walk, right? Journal about it. And then as you watch your life get better, at some point, you're going to help somebody else. And when they call you that night and tell you, I'm alive because of you, good luck sleeping that night because you won't. And you could do this for the rest of your life. And if you're a Christian or a person of faith, right? I mean, when somebody walks up to me and says, you know, you're walking in Christ's footsteps, I say, Pastor, don't make me tell you to shut up because I will, right? I went to Catholic school. I know those footsteps. Maybe 4 ridge lines over and 17 miles back. That's where I am. And he looked at me and he said, Matt, can I ask you a question? I said, sure. He said, did I ask for your opinion? And I said, he did me to me. And I said, no. He said, that's because I'm not interested in it. I'm telling you. And so if you're at all a spiritual person or a person of faith, this is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be able to use our suffering, right, to transform our lives, to help other people. And that's what the book is about.
Mr. McNamara, you are a very, very blessed man. And I'm going to be very blunt here. There's a lot of people who are doing, trying to sell books on what you're selling who are basically full of shit, and you absolutely aren't. So it's probably the biggest compliment I could pay you for a cynic who plows through 2 books a week and talks to 100 people in a year. I don't. There's one more thing I want to talk to you about before we leave here. So, and this was kind of buried in your publicity materials. You also put a book out. Now, your book came out in March. supposedly in April, you put a book out called Colleen Couldn't Forget, which is basically the same book regurgitated for children, right? Did it come out? I haven't.
No, I haven't been able to publish it. I'm working on the audio book, From Trauma to Joy, and the essence of that book is my dad was in Major League Baseball. When my nephews were murdered, my wife and I were talking. We're like, well, we won't tell our boys, 9 and 6 years old, right? Our little girl was 3, so she had no idea. And then it goes out on ESPN, and now you have to tell them, and you have to tell them the truth, because their friends are going to know, and they're going to hear about it. And so when I told my 2 sons, that I said something really bad happened today, you know, um, your cousins were murdered, your cousins were killed. My oldest son, 9 years old, says, were they killed? Did they get in a car accident? I said, no, their dad shot him in the head with a gun. My 6-year-old looks at me and says, Dad, why would a dad shoot their kid in the head with a gun? And I had to try to explain that, right? And then a year later, we went to visit my nephew's grave, just my 2 sons and I. As we're walking back to the car, and it was awful, right? And so as we're walking back to the car, my 10-year-old son says, Dad, can I ask you a question? I said, sure. He said, do you think it hurt? And I lied to him. I said, they didn't. 1 second they were asleep, and the next second they're with God. And now they're everywhere, and you can talk to them, and sometimes I'll talk back to you. Age appropriate answers, right? But every one of our kids has learned what happened that day to the cousins they don't know, right? My oldest knew them. And so the book is about a little girl who sees something that isn't even stated in the book. It's not even described. And her dad notices she's very quiet. And he said, Colleen, are you okay? Colleen's my youngest daughter. And she says, Daddy, I can't get what I saw on the interstate out of my head. And he said, there's things I can't get out of my head. Your grandma and grandpa, your mom, your brother and sister all have that. And he sends her to talk to them. And she learns all these lessons, right? And then she comes back to thank him and say, Daddy, I feel so much better. I know what to do now. I know there's nothing wrong with me. And he says, I'm not done with you. And she says, well, what do you want me to do now? He says, when you see your friends that are quiet, when they're struggling, I want you to sit next to them. And I want you to talk to them. And I want you to share what you've learned. And the book ends with her helping 2 little boys who live down the street whose parents just separated. And her waving, right? And so but it's based on my experience. Nobody could tell me what to tell my kids. And so it's a book designed for parents to share with their children and talk with their children, and to teach little kids who a lot of times you can't protect them from seeing ugly things and horrible things happen.
Right.
What do you do with it? You teach them the same lessons. And that's what that book's about. And hopefully it'll be out in July.
I think, believe it or not, I think you've answered the question here, but I'm going to ask you anyway. This reading about your book here made me think of something I read in USA Today about 20 years ago, and it's never left me. So these researchers, they followed a bunch of kids who had experienced extreme trauma, either being in a war zone or extreme sexual abuse. These are really, really extreme situations, and followed them into adulthood, like a couple thousand of them. And what they concluded was that half of them positively went on with their lives, and half of them were completely destroyed by this. But they could never figure out, they couldn't find a common element in either one of those groups. They couldn't come up with any sort of reason why one person was able to deal with it and one person wasn't. Do you have any thoughts on this?
The woman who I describe in my book, her name's Laura in the chapter in the book, who was sexually abused starting at the age of 5, right? And she's the most unbelievable person I know. And about 10 days ago, I was talking to her and I said, out of 100 kids, 0 have become what you become in your life. Very successful financially, very successful personally, but her life was a struggle the whole time. I said, why you? And she goes, I've thought about that. She goes, I don't know. She goes, maybe DNA. And then here's what she said. I had a 3rd grade teacher. We lived in extreme poverty. I can't tell you how many times I had lice, and different skin diseases related to malnutrition, right? I knew how to steal kerosene. I knew how to steal propane because we didn't have it sometimes in the winter. I had a third grade teacher, and she was the first woman that ever touched me like a mother would touch a daughter. She would when she would talk to me, she'd brush the hair out of my face. Right? When she talked to me, she would stroke my shoulder, my back, and she would take me to the library. She wanted me to skip a grade because I was so smart, and she would talk to me. And there's a book called The Body Keeps the Score, written by a guy named Bessel van der Kolk, and it's a fascinating journey through MRIs, through all the drugs that we take, to other wellness techniques, because those things don't work. And he's a PhD guy. He says it takes one person to reach into somebody's darkness and make them feel seen, and make them feel heard, and change their life. And that's my experience. That's my experience. And so for Gail, it was her third grade teacher. And I just had her do something with me late last week, and it was absolutely beautiful. She'd never spoken in public before. And the people there were like so inspired because of the horrible nature. And it's supposed to be a death sentence, right? It doesn't need to be, but you have to confront the truth that it's not going to go away. What do you do when those things happen? And like I say, this is my life. I touch those people's lives in the valley of the shadow of death. I look them straight in the face, and I don't sugarcoat anything. I had a young Marine look at me crying, and he says, "Does it ever stop hurting?" And I said, "No, never." And he said, "The reason I spoke to you is because you're the first person that looked me straight in the face and told me the truth." Right? His father committed suicide. A good friend had hung himself in high school. His brother committed suicide after he joined the Marine Corps, and he finds out that the reason his brother killed himself was because his brother was sleeping with his fiance. He said, "I knew I was going to be dead." He said, "Until I met you." And he meets me by accident because he was walking out of my presentation. And the audio video guy standing at the door, who had seen it the day before, and he says, "Where are you going?" Because he saw the guy who's had tears in his eyes. He said, "I'm not staying for this." He said, "Hold on." He comes against me, goes, "Mac, you need to talk to this guy." I'm 58. He's 20. We walk out, and then we had that exchange. First thing he said to me, "Does it ever stop hurting?" And I said, "No, never." And then we had a conversation. He's married now. He's adopted his wife's little girl, and he's living this great life. And he's supposed to be dead as fried chicken. And my point is, it takes one person to reach into somebody's darkness and tell them, "I believe in you. I know you can do it. If all these other people can do it, you can do it too." And we can all do that. Every one of us can do that. And so I would tell you, that would be my hypothesis, that the 50% that did, somewhere in their life had somebody who believed in them.
Michael McNamara, thank you so much for doing this, for coming on. I can't tell you how much I appreciate this. I've learned a lot here, and I hope the viewers have too. Really, seriously, God bless you. God bless you for what you're doing.
Well, Jim, first of all, thank you for having me on. If you could tell, I'm moderately passionate about what I do.
Here's your book, but I don't know if you can see it. I put it on the screen. So, and we'll put we'll put a link to it in Amazon on your blog, on our show blog too. So,
thank you.
Yeah, you're a passionate man, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much. You take care. All right.
I will. Thank you.
We'll see you soon. Well, that's one of the more interesting interviews we've ever done here. That was, yeah, he said he's a pretty cool guy, and he is. So I'm almost tempted, the wonderful thing about doing this not on the radio, and I should have mentioned while we were talking to him, I was talking to him before the show started. A very unusual thing that probably doesn't mean much to you, but means a lot to me. That Mac used to do a radio show. I think he did it in Grand Forks, I think, and he won the Marconi Award, which is kind of the Oscars for radio, as small market personality of the year. And they only give out 3 of those every year, and it's actually a pretty big deal. It actually is if you're in the broadcast industry. So yeah, good for him. At any rate, thanks to him for doing that. I'm almost, because we're not on the clock here, I'm almost tempted to can it. I don't know if there's much more I can say regarding but I'm gonna plow forward anyway here. This is part 2 of our show. If you ever watch the show regularly, you know we talk about the kind of the news that falls through the cracks in the second half of the show. And so, one thing I did want to pull out here is Chuck Todd on his podcast, the former guy who used to do Meet the Press on NBC. He came out with the thing, and I've been saying this. Matter of fact, I'm basically going to talk about predictions I made here that look like they're coming true. I have a pretty good track record here. My old boss at Conk News, Jeff Meyer, says I'm just as good as my boyfriend Bill O'Reilly. Yeah, okay. All right. But at any rate, Chuck Todd has claimed that he's convinced that Biden's staff put him up for that debate with Joe Biden in June of last year, specifically to get him out of the race. That was the only that they knew he could not run for a second term. He could not fulfill a second term, and that by putting him in that debate early. So supposedly, I've never got the story straight here. I don't know if anyone else has that Biden insisted on doing that debate with Trump in June, which is the earliest presidential debate ever done, and also technically neither one of them were candidates yet, technically, but he wanted to do it, and I guess they didn't stop him. They could have stopped him, and they didn't. But supposedly, according to Chuck Todd, his sources are telling him that they let that go on purpose because they knew he was going to bomb, and just to get him out. That was their way of getting his staff of getting him out of the race. This is their way of being, for lack of a better term, proactive. And also, and I even said this a couple of weeks ago on the show here. Whatever cocktail they were giving him to spruce him up for special events and occasions, they either didn't give it to him that night or they faked it. In other words, he got a placebo in his butt, because I've said the same thing, that they did that on purpose. It's the only reason you would have a debate that early. It's the only single reason. So there's that too. Now the other thing, and we're going to talk about Jonathan Lockwood tomorrow night too, about the thing that the Iranian war here. The other thing that I'm convinced of is that the Trump administration is basically screwing with definitions here when they tell everybody, well, they don't want regime changed, or also that we're not really involved in there. It's the Israeli war. These are so murky. The definitions of these terms have become so murky that it doesn't really matter. I don't think either way. So how, okay, so it's the Israelis' war, but we're the only people on the planet that have the bomb that can actually go 300 feet underground. And also, and I brought this up previously, this is a little known fact. We were talking with McNamara at the beginning of this interview here about the fact there's only 19 B-2 bombers. These planes cost $2 billion a piece. Now there's actually only 18. They lost one crashed and was destroyed. So they have 18 of these bombers. There's $2 billion a piece. They're the only airplanes ever commissioned by the military in the United States that are not allowed to be sold to any other parties. So Israel can't order one. They can order F-35 fighters and F-15 fighters and the original B-1s, which are still flying. They can order all that stuff, but you can't order a B-2. They're only manufactured for the U.S. Air Force. And there's some people who think that the reason is because they're using some sort of weird quasi anti-gravity technology. And I don't know. I don't want to get nuts here, too conspiratorial. They're not spacecraft, and no, they do fly. They fly via wings. I mean, it is aerodynamics at play here. There's no big physics busting or anything like that. But there's some people who think they have a little electromagnetic gizmo thing on that actually gives the plane a more lift or something like that, so it can fly farther and less fuel, that sort of thing. And they don't want this technology released. But anyway, what was my point? Oh, my point is, yeah. So, how do you define our involvement? How do you define whether we're in a war? You know, and it actually reminded me of what the Democrats have been doing the last 10 years, and that is, well, you don't like how something works, you redefine the terms. And in some ways, the Trump administration is copying the Democrat playbook on this. So it's really interesting too. Now, what's happened here? Um, just in the last few hours, supposedly Trump has said that Iran has asked for a ceasefire and Israel has agreed. That'll be interesting how this works because I think they are actually pushing for regime change. I mean, everyone's brought up the fact that this is the best time in the last 46 years where they have Iran on the ropes. And as we were talking with Mac in the interview, it's like what's come out of this is that nobody likes Iran. Iran has no real partners. If the people, they're either partners by imprisonment or their coercion or whatever it is, it's like they're not willing voluntary partners. Nobody likes this little country, and all they've done is cause trouble for 46 years. And so I think that it seems like everybody would like to see them gone, or at least not the country, but the regime that's running it, because as Mac pointed out, they're not Arabs or Persians. They have a rich history. It is even today. It's probably the most Western country in the entire region, other than Israel. Uh, and um, and yeah, and they're being run by a bunch of theocratic, dogmatic assholes. There you go. So, at any rate, I thought that was really interesting about that's my prediction on that. I don't know if there's going to be a regime change, so I guess I'm not predicting it per se. Well, I actually am. I think there'll be something. Now, I heard I think it was General Keane on Fox News this afternoon. He said what would likely happen is that it wouldn't be directly the representative government wouldn't happen directly in Iran right away. What probably would happen is that there'd be a military coup that would push the mullahs out, and then after that, either there'd be another coup or the military would seize power to a democratic government, one or the other. And I agree. Those are the likely scenarios, but I don't think that the Trump administration is necessarily discouraging this. I really don't. So, and once again, it comes on how you define terms, how you define what is what. Um, and you've probably heard this: the country of Pakistan has nominated Donald Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize, and this is because the way he brokered the ceasefire between India and Pakistan just recently. Now, I think the amazing thing about this is that one of the countries involved nominated him. This wasn't like some Marjorie Taylor Greene or some stupid senator from, Timbuktu or something like that. One of the two countries involved nominated him. And that carries a lot of weight. It's a lot of symbolic weight, even if it doesn't matter to the Nobel Committee, even if it doesn't matter. It's actually a pretty cool thing that they thought to do that. And apparently they're quite grateful too. I mean, it looks like this is sticking. So, but you're talking about two countries that have traditionally hated each other, India and Pakistan. I don't think you can't get much better, or worse, or whatever you want to say, extreme than that. And the other thing that's come out of this uh, uh, polls recently, being the last couple of days here, is that amazingly, a large percentage of Americans, regardless of political affiliation, are starting to be non-isolationist in regards to America's place in the world. That the latest polls that have come out said solidly 65% roughly of Americans uh, think that America should step up as the leader on the world stage, and instead of trying to be isolationist. And this includes Democrats too. It wasn't just Republicans and independents. And that's really interesting too. That figure went up 20% in what, 4 years or something like that. It's really pretty amazing how the tide has shifted on this. It really is. And finally, And I think this is. Hold on, I gotta check this because I didn't write down. Oh yeah, it's Ray Dalio. That's right. That's what I thought. And he is the what bank does he run? Oh, he's just a billionaire investor. But he is really talking about the fact that we got to get our crap together regarding the government debt, or else he says America's going to have an economic heart attack, and he's right. And I've been talking about this forever too. And we have guests on. I want to have more guests on. Um, I got to put a call into my friend Murray Sabrin, economist. Uh, he was on our very first show on July 31st, 2023, and so that 2-year anniversary is coming up next month, and I want to have him on for that show again. But Murray's, we talk about this all the time. I'm now I have a line on other economists coming on here, and I want to talk about it's. I find it astonishing how this is the single most capitalist country in the world, and nobody in America knows shit about economics. That includes the people, the vast majority of the people that work in Congress. It's unbelievable. Nobody knows crap about money. I mean, AOC, and this is the real amazing thing. She was an economics major, and she just talks crap about, she doesn't know anything. I mean, it's mind boggling how stupid this woman is. Or not stupid, really uninformed. And that's the thing. But her major was, she just graduated from college like what, 4 years ago or something. I mean, it's like unbelievable. I don't know what the hell they taught her in school, but they probably, that gets back to what Mac and I were talking about. They probably didn't teach her anything. These students are so into navel gazing and social justice causes. They don't actually learn anything of any substance, which of course is going to be the downfall of America. And some people will tell you that are conspiracy theorists that that's actually the idea, you know, and that's how the Chinese will take over because their kids will be way more educated than ours. So anyway, we got to get this debt thing under control because now Dalio is saying in this article, this is from Fox Business. He said in this interview, he said that we are very quickly approaching the point where we're going to have to take out debt to service our debt. And yeah, that's the red line right there. If we have to borrow money to service the money we've already borrowed, all bets are off. And we're perilously close to that situation right now. And we are. We're $37 trillion in debt, and we've been running deficits of about $4 trillion a year. Now, this is one of the big complaints about the quote unquote big beautiful bill that's in the Senate right now is that it doesn't cut enough off the annual budget, and there might be some truth to that. There's economists saying, well, the thing about the tariffs is that they're not calculating the income from the tariffs and offsetting the debt, and because apparently the CBO doesn't run that formula or something like that. And there may or may not be some truth to this. I haven't been able to actually get any real straight information. And then the other thing is too, the third way of looking at that is that might be true, but it's still might not be a lot of money. So it appears when all is said and done, this whole thing with the tariff situation, it looks like what's going to happen is we're going to have 10% across the board tariffs on pretty much every country in the world. But you have to understand that's way more. I mean, right now, I think the average per country is only 2 or 3%. And so this is, I mean, at 10%, we get some money income from this, and it's not high enough to actually hurt anybody trying to sell anything. It's not like, we put like 75% tariffs on China. I mean, that will completely screw them up, but that was a punitive measure to get them to negotiate. So if at 10% tariffs, that's probably manageable. And the Trump administration, their take on this is that at 10% tariffs, that will bring in a sizable amount of money, extra money, into the government that will offset the tax cuts that will become permanent. And that may happen. I mean, that may be true, but I don't really know for sure. And like I said, I don't know the exact amounts. I haven't been able to figure out the exact amounts so far. So that may or may not happen or may not be true. That's my point. But the point is, yes, we're ridiculously drowning in debt. We just can't do this anymore. And if people say, well, you don't understand, there's kids who are going to starve. At some point, somebody has to say, well, that's too bad. And I know, right? I look like an asshole by saying that, but it's true. You're looking at we're literally looking at the republic collapsing because of this, and nobody understands it. Oh no, you're exaggerating. No, I'm not. I'm not. Now, I'm not going to sit here and predict that the republic's going to collapse because of this. I do think at some point, but like my friend said, I have a friend in finance who makes fun of me all the time. He said, "Yeah, well, something's yeah." He said, "I can assure you, there's going to be a Great Depression someday. It may be next month, and it may be 200 years from now. But I can assure you, it's going to happen." So yeah, so it's easier for me to sit here and say, "Yeah, well, we're going to have a Great Depression because of this." Yeah, in 2083. So I don't know. I'm not going to say that. But at any rate, but the point is, this is not good. None of this debt stuff is good. It just isn't. You know, that's the point. That's what I had to rifle through tonight. And I tell you what, we're going to end it at that. So tomorrow night, we got, oh my God, I got to look. Yeah, Salvador Litvak, the Jewish humorist, he's coming on. And then for the second half, for a little bit, we're going to talk to Jonathan Lockwood, a military historian and former retired U.S. Army colonel, about what's going on in Iran right now. That's for tomorrow night. Wednesday, Larry Newman, bail bondsman and Bigfoot investigator. Thursday, L.A. Marzulli, paranormal researcher and prolific author. Those are our guests for this week. So, and you always find the current guest list on the front page of our website at jimatnight.com. So we'll put a link up to Michael McNamara's book in our blog at jimatnight.com. I want to thank him for coming on. I want to thank you for watching and listening. Really appreciate it. I'd say I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm listening to Mac, and we're in the middle of this interview, and I realize about 30 minutes in, like, well, this is why I do this, to talk to people like this. So I really appreciate him coming on. I appreciate you watching too, very much. Good night, Uncle Donnie, wherever you are. And good night to you, wherever you may be. I'm Jim Peters. I'll see you tomorrow night. Take care, everybody.